Good morning to you. I'm going to give you, my name is Scott, if we never had the chance to meet. Great to be with you this morning. I'm going to give you 3 quotes that some famous Baltimoreans have spoken over the city of Baltimore, and I want to just give you a moment to sort of process that as it relates to your story. Perhaps as someone who's lived here for a while but is getting ready to relocate, or as someone that's like, hey, we're fresh in, we just got a lease, we just bought a house. Just here, let me give you 3 of these things and see how they grab you, okay? Number 1, this one's from Frederick Douglass. Going to live at Baltimore laid the foundation and opened the gateway to all my subsequent prosperity. That's interesting because he came here enslaved, but as a place where he found freedom, as a place where he started, learned to read, as a place where he was able to, later in his life, invest. You can look at Douglas Place over in Upper Fells Point and see where he became kind of a developer with justice, Frederick Douglass. That's his thoughts about the city of Baltimore. How about this one? This one's from Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's hard for me to view Baltimore outside the context of what Baltimore has always been in my mind, a violent place. So born and raised Baltimorean, reflecting on his experience through the lens of the city of Baltimore, he says, hey, we can talk crab cakes, we can talk Orioles, but we're always going to have this thing in the back of my mind because of the place I grew up and the experience I had, that Baltimore is a place of violence. Here's a third one. Perhaps you can relate to this one from the author Laura Lippman. She said, loving Baltimore requires resilience. Loving Baltimore requires resilience. So, I don't know if you're coming from a posture of Douglas today, or if you're coming from a posture of Coates, or if you're coming from a posture of Lippman, but that's what we're trying to sort of bring into this room and into this space in our time together. How do we make sense of what it means to love where we live? Whether Baltimore City is our home, the Baltimore Metro is our region, whether we are 60 years and going, whether we are on our way, somewhere else eventually, but we're here right now, what does it mean to love where we live? How do we take the things that we love about a place like Baltimore and take the things that frustrate and confound us and hold those things in tension? Hold those things in tension in a way that says, hey, we're not the snarky dude on the next door page. We're not the curmudgeon screaming, get off my lawn. But we may also weep over our city sometimes the way Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. To carry the victories, to carry the difficulties, to hold those things in tension and be God's people in a particular place. Now, we've said, we're 2 weeks into this, if you are a Baltimorean or you're part of the Baltimore Metro and you have a live, work, play relationship to the city of Baltimore, then let Baltimore be your context here. If you are on your way to another place and Baltimore is a place where you're kind of finishing well, then figure out how to finish well, but also contextualize. Figure out how to contextualize to wherever you're going. Hey, I live in Florida, and the only thing we share here is humidity. Okay, cool. Figure out how to take the things we're talking about and let it relate to what it means to love where you live, where you actually live. So week 1, we talked about this idea of having God's view of a particular people and place. Not just looking at places as like a place to go, what can I get out of a location? But what does God see when God sees this densely packed expression or this rural landscape where the cows outnumber the people 4-1? Whatever it is for you, what does God see when God sees that place? And then today, what does it mean to love where we live when, if we're honest, going through any sort of season of time where we live, there's going to be times where you don't particularly like where you live. You're not going to like where you live because maybe the season changed, or because something's happening around you, or because there's a particular difficulty that you're facing or addressing, or you're wrestling with a change of season. I mean, there's a reality that goes into those wrestlings, and how do we apply the heart of God to those practical wrestlings? Knowing, and according to the scriptures, we're not the first ones to wrestle with this. So we're going to look at Jeremiah 29 today and sort of revisit a passage that, as the Foundry, we probably talk about a lot. It's one of those Old Testament passages that we look at often because it speaks directly to the tension that I raised, of what it means to love a place when you don't always like a place, when you're always a little bit disoriented by the things that are happening in it and around it, and you're trying to make sense of it in your place and time. If you remember the Hunger Games, and Katniss and Peeta being scooped up from District 12 and moved to the Capitol, whether you read the story or you saw the movie or you don't know what I'm talking about and you're going to check back in 30 seconds, like the disorientation of these two young people making their way to this place of opulence and an opportunity for some, but also a place of death, and they're trying to figure out how to process the disorientation of like what just happened. Like, I don't know what to make of this situation. That's what we're going to find when we look at the people that are receiving this letter that we're going to read together today. The people that are receiving the letter that we're going to read today are officials, they're artisans, they're influencers, they're important people. But they've been captured against their will, they've been deported, they've been the source of violence, and they've been uprooted from the city in which they were influencers and kind of a big deal, the city of Jerusalem, to a city where now they're to assimilate and hopefully kill a culture, Babylon, right? And by saying kill a culture, the way Babylonians kind of did their business was like the way you stamp out rebellion is you come in, you ransack a city, sure, but if you take the culture makers out of that city, and you take the people that inspire hope out of that city, and you acclimate them to your place, and you make them like your place, or, say, or else, life in Babylon or else, then you can take all these people over here with their now puppet government, and you can make them go, okay, I guess it's either Babylon or bust. And that's kind of how the Babylonians did it, on top of terrible, horrific violence. So this group of people have not experienced the firsthand impact of the terroristic violence that some of their neighbors would have, but are processing the disorientation of having witnessed their lives preserved, but their city ransacked. And now being uprooted to a city that has some of the seven, some of the seven wonders of the world, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, this culture that is opulent and important to world history in its own way. And now they're there and trying to make sense of what do you do now in this place, in this time, having this experience, not necessarily loving where you live, even though the Babylonians are kind of like, you better love where you live. You don't have much of a choice. Here is a letter that Jeremiah, a prophet who is hanging back in Jerusalem, has smuggled into the city through this puppet government that's been established in Jerusalem, smuggled and sent in for the exiles to read and speak to one another about how to process the disorientation of being in a city that may be difficult difficult to love in terms of where they live, okay? This is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar carried into the exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is after King Jehoiakim and the queen mother, the court officials, the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the skilled workers, the artisans, had gone into exile from Jerusalem. He entrusted the letter to Elisha, son of Shephem, and to Gemariah, son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. We just restated everything in a more official way to what I said. Okay, here's the letter. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring back you to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you among the nations and all the places from which I have banished you, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. This is the word of the Lord. So how do we, in light of this letter, as a people experiencing the disorientation of we are in a place where there's opulence, there's opportunity, there's really good things, but we also feel the tension and mess of a whole slew of other things. How do we love where we live when we may not necessarily like where we live? That's the tension that Jeremiah is raising. And how he's going to equip them to think through this particular thing. I just want to offer a couple thoughts too. The first thing I would offer to you is that he's challenging them in this way. Think about what voices the exiles are letting speak to them about life where they live. There are voices that are saying, be apathetic, this is going to be a short thing. There are voices that are probably saying, blend right in, you're going to be here for a while, have a Snickers. There are voices that are probably encouraging animosity. And in your relationship to your city, to your place, whether it's Baltimore or not, you can often come to a place of apathy, come from a place of animosity, or from a place of imitation. Life's great, we're just going to live it there. And what he's telling them to think about is a formation conversation as it relates to thinking well about where they live. So this Lord Almighty imagery, first of all, is a call back to who their God is. The God of Israel, this idea that I've carried you into exile, the relationship, the covenant is fractured, it's tense, but it's not broken. You still belong to me. You're exiles. So what do exiles do? They don't go and immerse themselves as citizens. They have a different way to think about their identity, even as they're entering a space. And then he's telling them to think about even the alternative voices that are speaking to them. Did you catch the part about do not listen to the dreams you are encouraging them to have? Interesting wording, right? It's a reference to a guy named Hananiah in the previous chapter who is saying a version of, hey, exiles, it's going to be a short trip. You know how mom and dad are. They get a little turned up, and then they'll go about their business, and they'll forget that we were going to have a punishment conversation, that there was going to be consequences. When they were driving the car, there was going to be consequences, but now they're home, and we've all had dinner, and we're not hangry anymore, so it's going to be okay. Hananiah is telling the exiles, go see an art museum, get on TripAdvisor, have a walk, have a smile. It's a short trip. And Jeremiah is going, no, you want it to be that way, but it's not going to be that way. And pay attention to your formation. That line, the dreams you are encouraging them to have, right? If you want to believe that Baltimore is the worst place in the world, I assure you, you can find the op-eds to support you. If you want to believe that Baltimore is the best place in the world, I assure you that we can find the PR campaigns that will tell you why. Have you seen the benches? It's the greatest city in America. But how do we think about our formation in this place? How do we think about the group identity, the definitions of success, our approach to place, processing our own emotions as far as the thing that's got here, or the thing that we're going through that's informing why we might feel displaced here? Are we bringing those things from a place of integrity before God? And are we letting the love of God form and shape our sense of place? Or are we just running to sort of we cannot divorce this conversation from the things that are forming us, the things that we've experienced, the emotions that we're going through, the moment that we find ourselves in. All of those things are chipping away at the picture of our shape of city, right? So some of us are in a Frederick Douglass moment. Like, this is the greatest place, this is the greatest moment, this is the greatest thing that's ever gone on. Others of us, we only feel the disorientation of what's wrong about it. Or others of us feel like we are so far from home, we don't know what's going on right now, we feel displaced there, we don't feel at home here. How do we bring those formations before the God who says, I'm for you, I love you, I'm working? And in private moments, let those things stoke and shape how we engage our sense of place. So that we don't just carry everything that's great and not pay attention behind the scenes to the things where that greatness is not for everyone, where it's not working for everybody else. Or how do we live in a way that processes well the things that are discouraging and hard, so that we just don't grow like Jonah. Jonah, who some people think had family that was impacted by the Babylonian captivity. When he's called to Nineveh to preach the Ninevites, that's the Babylonian Empire. And he's just like, here's the problem, God, in Jonah chapter 3. I know that you're going to be gracious and forgiving. Like, the idea of going to a city and doing something Jeremiah is not able to do, by the way, which is convince people to repent and align to the way of God. Jeremiah is not super successful at that. Jonah, you get to go to this place in the Babylonian Empire, and 120,000 people are going to repent and turn from their sin and honor God. And he's like, nope, I don't like the idea that you like them. I don't like the idea that you're going to have compassion for them. What's happened? A lot of things probably in Jonah's story, but one of which is likely the things going on in Jonah's life make it really, really difficult to see a city like Nineveh the way God might see it. And so this idea of like, hey, Babylon, exiles, is not just its opulence. It's not just its brokenheartedness. It's not just the things it's done into you. It's all of those things. But we're asking a bigger question. What is God doing here? What is God going to do in this place? And how does the story of God continue even in Babylon? How does God's presence show up in Babylon in a way that transforms the sense of empire that we have? Right? And so we're going to go one more Hunger Games reference, and then we're moving on from it. Like Haymitch and Effie are to Peeta and Katniss. What are the things that are helping you process and shape your approach to your sense of place? Is it all snark? Is it all, this is the greatest thing ever? Is it, Lord, give me eyes to see the city as you would see it? This question matters as it relates to our approach to any place we live going forward. He then moves from that, which is the recurring, I think it's in all the parts of the letter, that conversation about formation, but then there's a really practical question about living with presence. And as you know, there's a difference between intentionality and good intentions. A lot of us have good intentions to make an impact in all kinds of places, but that's not the same as having a sense of intentionality. Taking your stated values and making them work in the grind and the nonsense of your schedule. Easier said than done for any of us. But the whole conversation that he gives to these people who are being told by Hananiah, short trip, hang out, catch a museum, catch a flick, don't get killed. Just what some of your grandparents said when you moved to Baltimore. I'm not wrong. He says, build houses, settle down. Plant gardens, eat what they produce. Have sons and daughters, and give your sons and daughters in marriage. Increase there, do not decrease. All of those things are like things where you plant a seed in the soil, right? And you've got to process over the course of time the ebbs and the flows of life in a place, which is different than being on vacation, where you just say yes to extra ice cream and every excursion. Or when we lived in one house that I knew we weren't going to live in forever, where we were just hey, we moved to this block in Baltimore, and we were just this is a run-out-the-clock situation. We don't like this street. It's not our forever street. But how do I live here and not be a jerk knowing that we're going to be here for the term of this lease? But if I just begin to engage my neighbors a series of transactions like that, then that's very, very different than saying, hey, this is a place where we're going to try to engage. We're going to try to take root. We're going to try to make the love of God manifest, whether we're here for the 11 months or the 11 weeks or whatever it is for us, or we're here for the next 11 years or 20 years or 50 years or whatever it may be. He tells them, hey, match that formation to the idea of real presence. Get out of vacation mode, and then begin to think, when you get out of vacation mode, the power of that long-term presence as it relates to how Babylon's picture of prosperity will look. He tells them to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Are we willing to consider what our presence and a sense of permanence, even if it's short-lived permanence, makes possible where we live? So we don't necessarily like it. We sometimes wish we were in a different season. We're not really sure we are in the right place, but we're living in that in-between moment. An earthquake event has happened that has shaped how we got to Baltimore or why we can't leave it yet. And we're wrestling with, what do we do about that? But what in that in-between time, how might we seek the peace and prosperity of this place? Because what does he tell them? If it prospers, what will happen? So will you. Now, what do a lot of us do about a sense of place and purpose, right? If this place works for me, I will stay in it. That seems like a very good, upwardly mobile way to live your life. But what's different about this approach is to say, hey, where it is not working, maybe you can leverage that in a way that helps bring flourishing not just to you, but to your neighbor. In fact, if you pursue their flourishing, if you actually think about life through the lens of what do I want for myself, and apply it to my neighbor, to apply it to my political enemy, if I apply it to the person on the block I don't like, if I apply it to the neighborhood I've been told I shouldn't ever hang out in, then how might I live differently in light of actually thinking that through? See, they're being called here, this peace and prosperity, these are pretty words, but there's a Hebrew concept, the concept of shalom. The Hebrew concept of shalom is not how Babylon lives. Babylon lives welcome to the jungle, baby. You're going to die. You either become part of what's happening here or you get left behind. The Hebrew concept of shalom, which is what they're supposed to be doing in Jerusalem, they're not, is the idea that nothing's fractured, nothing's broken. That relationally, physically, mentally, spiritually, there's a oneness with God, one another, themselves, and creation. Does not describe the kings of Israel and their relationship to their people, by the way. You can go back and read why they get to this place. When you get there, seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Take this concept that was supposed to be a promised land concept, and you make it apply in this place amongst these people who are your political enemies, who do not want what you want. And if you pursue their spiritual, mental, emotional, physical flourishing, you're going to flourish here too. And what would it look like to approach the places and the seasons where we really don't want to be or we sense that we're not going to be here long through that lens. Not just looking at cities and places for what can I milk out of this place for as long as I can stand to deal with it before, thankfully, hopefully, I get that other job. But to say, hey, for the time that God has me in this place, what might I do to reject apathy, to reject animosity, to reject imitation, and to really be for my city? To really be for my city. Isaiah 65 gives this picture of like what shalom looks like, and here's a list. It's not exhaustive, but it's like public celebrations and happiness, public health for children and the widows and aged, housing, food, family support systems, the absence of violence, meaningful work. God's giving through Isaiah a picture of a flourishing city and saying, hey, that's what the Messiah is going to do, and the whole essence of their job here in Babylon is so you pursue that kind of life. You don't just shrink back into self-preservation. How do we reject then false pictures of peace in Baltimore? How do we reject false pictures of peace in our country when we feel, as you might today, the sting of seeing words like justice and freedom and like co-opted to justify things that are the opposite of God's picture of flourishing? And do not beget shalom, they beget violence. They beget peace for some, but not flourishing for all. How do we as followers of Jesus aim to be a church for the city? When we think about Baltimore, when we think about what it means to be American, to say, hey, we're going to be a healing community. Because to live in a place like Baltimore, to live in a place like the United States, means that there are times that you will weep. Or you will deal with the weeping of someone else. To be healers of community, which is not the same thing. To say, hey, all of these systems that create this brokenness, how do we not just keep slapping Band-Aids and going, well, I'm only here for a little bit, and I blame the last guy? To live with a resilience to say, how do we be healers of community when there's hundreds of years of infrastructural nonsense that aims to fracture it? And then how do we organize as a just community, which is, again, easier said than done? When our approaches to the toxicity in the air are sometimes such that, we're discouraged, we're despondent, we don't feel like there's a lot of hope. Maybe that's how you feel today, processing the past 24 hours. Like, how do I live knowing that the next week, there's going to be just further entrenched responses to what it means to seek false definitions of peace that are insincere, that are incomplete, that actually will incite more violence, or are trying to, and very few that are actually insightful. And this is where Jeremiah 29:11 comes in. It's not just that graduation verse that promised you that you're going to get free of your student loan debt because the Lord has plans to prosper you and not harm you, and you're not going to get cancer, and you're going to get the first house you want, and everything's going to be flowery for you. But it's a way to say, in difficult circumstances, the work of God is still going. Cling to it. This idea of clinging to the hope in Jeremiah 29:11 is an active stoking of hope in a situation that feels despondent and full of despair. And that is what it means to live into this kingdom that Jesus is ushering in. Nicholas Wolsterhoff says it this way, that we are not to stand around, hands folded, waiting for shalom to arrive. We are workers in God's cause, his peace workers. The Missio Dei is our mission. That feels really good when it's like about going to an Oriole game and having a $6 coffee and having a brunch with a friend. But when it is like your neighbor's pest control problem coming into your house, when it is the partisan toxicity in the air and trying to be a healing place in a place where there's a lot of fracture, it's important that we bring before God not just a posture of thanks, but as we come to the Lord's table, a posture of lament. To lament not as people that do not have hope, but to bring to God the tension we feel between the world that God wants and the world you came in feeling the sting of today. So as we go to communion, and Julia's going to lead us in a place of lament that's going to shape our posture toward the table. And it's not just a place to be warm and fuzzy. Last week we were like, yay, thank you, Baltimore. But today we want to take a moment and go, hey, we know that tension between reality and aspiration collides somewhere in this space for you. May the love of God meet you there.